Darkcast Network. The light shines brightest on our indie podcasts. California True Crime is a podcast that sometimes deals with heinous acts of violence towards other individuals. This podcast may not be suitable for everyone. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome to this episode of California True Crime. I'm Jessica, and I'm here with Sean and Charles. And instead of a regular episode this week, we have a discussion episode, and we're going to talk about a disgusting murder that occurred here in California on March 15th in Tracy, California. How are you guys doing?
I'm doing good. Anxious to talk about this. Something a little bit different for us, talking about a case that's happening and unfolding almost in real time here in California.
Yeah, when I first heard about it, it's a sad, terrible case. So,
the crime that we're going to discuss tonight took place, as I said, just this month on March 15th, and it took place in Tracy, California. Tracy is a city in California's Central Valley. It's part of the San Joaquin County. That's the same county as Stockton. That's a city a lot of you have probably heard of. It's about 21 miles from Stockton, California. It's a city of over 90,000 people, and it sits on a really busy section of freeway called the Interstate 205. That interstate connects both to the I-5 and to the 99. It connects to both the Bay Area as well as those freeways we've talked about before connect up and down California.
Yeah, and the 205 really is for that section of Northern California is kind of one of the main arteries into the Bay Area. So it's, as you said, Jessica, it seems like it's always clogged with traffic, especially in the mornings during commute time and in evenings and the same. And then anytime a special event like a Giants game or when the 49ers were located there, it's for the people kind of in the Central Valley, like I said, a main thoroughfare.
It's kind of interesting how Tracy, out of all the cities around there, is probably the least hung out in for me, but I've probably been in it so many times just from driving through. I never stopped there. I remember way back in high school, I went to a weird rich party on a golf course, and that's pretty much my life in Tracy. There's nothing really much there.
Yeah, I always felt the same. Jessica and I had some really good friends that lived there. And so years and years ago, I would go and kind of hang out at their house a lot. But even then, I don't think, there's a big mall. There's a movie theater in the mall. We'd hang out there. And so I will say I hung out a lot in Tracy, but we didn't go to anything in Tracy. It was usually we were going over the hill to the Bay Area or, back this direction to go up to Sacramento or somewhere else, and then again, I think this is kind of indicative of Tracy too. Is it seems to be kind of a halfway point for a lot of places. So there are a lot of stuff you'll see that's built kind of around the main 205, and it seems like Tracy's kind of grown up around that.
And the reason we're taking time this week just to discuss this crime, it was a murder, is because hate crime charges have been filed in this case. There are 2 people currently under arrest for that murder. They have been arraigned, but a preliminary hearing and trial have not happened yet. I believe by the time this episode comes out, it will be just as the preliminary hearing is set to begin. And so we want to state from the outset that all people are innocent until proven guilty. We haven't seen the evidence. We only know what's been reported so far, but this is a really difficult crime to talk about. It's a disgusting crime, and what they're being charged with is particularly disgusting. So we want to just kind of talk about it and talk about what we might be able to expect from a trial and what's going to happen.
As well as if you've listened to the show, you know that we, the 3 of us, are from Northern California, and it was kind of shocking that this happened. And we've seen a lot of publicity, and we thought it would be an opportunity for us to talk about something kind of going on in the news now. And then as the story progresses and unfolds and more information is released, we'll be updating this both through our social media, at Cali True Crime, on our website, californiatruecrime.com, or through future bonus episodes in the future.
On Tuesday, March 15th, 2022, at approximately 9:09 p.m., multiple 911 calls were made regarding a shooting at the Chevron gas station on 3775 North Tracy Boulevard in Tracy, California. According to a caller there, a man was on the floor of the station who had been shot in the upper body. This Chevron is right off the 205 freeway. So you guys were talking about how Tracy is a town that's really built up around the freeway. We've talked about those kinds of towns like Merced, where you might stop and go to the gas station. We've probably been to this gas station 100 times.
Yeah.
It's right by across the street from a Denny's. It's not quite in the heart of the 205 where a lot of more businesses and stuff are, but it's right next to another, I believe, a Shell station. So it's a pretty common place to stop and get gas for truckers, for anybody driving through there. When police arrived, they discovered the victim was a 30-year-old African-American man named Justin Peoples, and he had been shot once and stabbed multiple times. Peoples was from Stockton, and ambulances were immediately called, and he was taken to San Joaquin General Hospital. At 11:09 p.m., Justin Peoples died from his wounds. According to a Patch article called Hate Crime, Murder Charges and Killing of Black California Navy Marine, Justin Peoples was at the gas station to get change for the laundromat. His girlfriend was in a car outside the station waiting for him.
What's a Patch article?
So Patch is a site, it has various articles all around California. It's just a news site. So that's where I got this article from.
Okay.
On Wednesday the 16th, so the next day, 2 people were arrested in the Stockton home, and they've been charged with 1 count of first-degree murder. Each of them has been charged with 1 count of first-degree murder, with weapons enhancements and hate crime special circumstances. Jeremy Wayne Jones, who is 49 years old, was charged with first-degree murder with an enhancement charge for the use of a weapon, specifically a knife. Christina Lynn Garner, who is 42 years old, was charged with first-degree murder with an enhancement charge for the use of a weapon, specifically a gun. And just this kind of a callback to other things we've talked about. We've talked about enhancements before. Typically, they mean that if you are found guilty of murder or assault or whatever the crime is that they're charging with you, an enhancement means that they will increase the penalty by a certain amount of years. So if you're found guilty of assault with a deadly weapon, then you'll get a few more years on top of that. And those are crimes that can't stand on their own. Those are crimes that you have to be convicted of the main illegal act, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for example, it's not necessarily illegal to have a gun or own a knife or even to carry those things, but the fact that you were using them in the commission of a crime, that's the enhancement.
Yeah. San Joaquin County District Attorney Torre Verber Salazar announced on Friday, March 18th, 2022, during a press conference after the arraignment, that they have filed hate crimes charges against both Jones and Garner. Again, hate crime charges are enhancements or can also act as special circumstances. So if you get those charges on top of assault, for instance, they will enhance the penalty if you're found guilty for, I think, 3 years. Or in this case, if you are charged with first-degree murder and you're found guilty, then the possibility that can increase your penalty to the death penalty or life in prison without parole. There's also a third person in custody, Christopher Domenko, who lives in Tracy and is charged as an accessory after the fact. All 3 were arraigned on March 18th and have been denied bail. So there isn't a lot known about this crime itself. We don't have a ton of details. Some articles will say that there was a confrontation inside the gas station before the shooting and the stabbing. And I think that's a difficult word to use because it's not very descriptive to us. It doesn't tell us who confronted who, or if there was some sort of argument, or if these 2 just simply confronted somebody else. I do know that everybody has said at the press conference that nothing that went on in the gas station would ever give anyone cause to think that this should have been the outcome, that that Justin Peoples wasn't fighting with them, that he didn't cause this to happen. The crime itself was captured on security camera, but that has not been released. And that's how police so quickly identify both the suspects. They also capture their car, so they have their license plate number.
Which again, that's like you said, they were arrested the very next day.
Yeah, and everyone describes this as just a senseless act of violence. So they don't believe that these three people knew. I mean, the two people who were arrested knew each other, but they didn't know Justin Peoples prior to this, and then Justin didn't know them.
It's just a random, and I won't say random because there was it seems like from everything, there was a purpose behind this. They were there at the same time, but the appearance is that this was a racially motivated crime.
That's what they were talking. That's what they talked about in the press conference. We don't have a lot of information about what that crime looked like or the details exactly like we do in other cases because this is an ongoing case and they've yet to have the prelim or the actual trial. But that is what they've said during that press conference. And there is supposed to be a preliminary hearing, as I said. I think it's supposed to start on April 4th. So I don't know if that will come out before or after this episode, but pretty close. According to a CBS article, the two people arrested for the alleged murder of Peoples, Garner and Jones, had indicated on Facebook or Meta, I'm not sure which people use now, that they were in a relationship. The prosecutor declined to say what evidence they had that made this a hate crime, but they did say that they intend to prove that Justin Peoples was, quote, intentionally killed because of his race, color, religion, nationality, or country of origin. Salazar, the DA, said, quote, there is no place for hate in our community. No one should be victimized because of their race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, or religion. These types of crimes are reprehensible, and my administration will prosecute to the fullest extent of the law to hold those who perpetuate hate accountable. Siku Millington, who's the chief of police in Tracy, also said, quote, when community members are victims of crimes related to hate, we will use our resources to bring those responsible for justice. So they've made it quite clear in this case that there really wasn't another motive other than hate and racism why this crime occurred in Tracy on the 15th. According to several articles and to the DA, the suspects have a history of white supremacism, a support including the Aryan Brotherhood, skinheads, white pride, and Nazis. The DA also released pics that show tattoos on Jones that say, quote, white and pride going down both his arms, and he also has swastika tattoos.
So with these tattoos and him saying that the fullest extent to the law, they haven't announced that they'll be doing gang enhancements on this, have they?
I haven't seen anything.
Because it seems like with all these backing of white supremacy groups and his tattoos, I mean, a lot of times the gang enhancement for other gangs is just because they have one tattoo and they get a gang enhancement on top of it.
Right.
So I'm just wondering if, they're like just slipping that to the side or it just hasn't come up yet.
I wonder if it has to do with the affiliation, because there would be a difference between being friendly with a gang and then being part of it, which I know it might be a semantic argument for some, but having, reading certain websites or having certain things tattooed or even, icons all over your Facebook page or your Twitter profile or whatever they're using might be a little different unless they can draw a direct line from you to some group actual affiliation. Yeah.
Maybe I'm just looking into it too much and not knowing enough information. Just the tattoos that he seems to have in the first place are a little close to that, but you're right. Yeah. How can you really pinpoint where those tattoos are and what affiliation it does come with?
Well, and I wonder if that's because I know we've talked off air about things like that of like and I think we've all read and seen issues of that of people being involved in the gangs and having those enhancements like you said, Sean, because of a particular tattoo. I wonder if that has to do with the fact of the type of tattoo rather than the meaning behind it. Mm-hmm. That would be interesting. So if you're listening to this and know more about how like tattoos or body modifications are used in some of these cases, drop us a line at calitruecrime@gmail.com or hit us up on our social media.
Hey, I'm Courtney.
And I'm Amanda.
And this is A Nefarious Nightmare, now officially partnered with Darkcast Network.
We cover true crime and the paranormal. We raise awareness about the senseless acts committed against victims. We won't go easy on the offenders, but show serious empathy to the victims.
And sometimes we dive into some weird topics outside of true crime, like the paranormal or even conspiracy theories.
Our listeners are definitely the best, and we are their biggest fans.
So join us. Come on in. All are welcome. Let's dive into these cases. You can find us on any podcast platform and on YouTube. Be sure to find us, hit subscribe, and share us with your friends.
We do have great life advice, such as don't be a Richard.
Yes, and wear deodorant. We don't want to smell you.
But all are welcome to a nefarious nightmare.
So we've talked a little about hate crimes before, especially in the Gwen Orejo episode, and how difficult they are to prove. The DA in this case has said that she wouldn't have brought charges, hate crime charges, if she didn't think that she could prove them. And articles do say that the things that they intend to use are, their past people they knew or things that they participated in, including things like their Facebook accounts. And initially, when this crime happened, a lot of news outlets looked to their Facebook accounts to kind of get more information about them. The Daily Beast had an article on the crime, and they said that their Facebook accounts had a lot of references you would see, particularly connected to white supremacist groups, including like North mythology, the white pride, as we talked about, just connections like that I think that they'll bring into this case. So what are hate crimes? This is set out under California Penal Code 422.55 to 422.93. And hate crimes are, as I said, you can't necessarily commit a hate crime without another act. They're part of the murder. So they first have to prove that these two people that they allege committed this crime actually did commit first-degree murder. And then they have to prove in this case that the motive was specifically hate. Hate under the law can be anything from a disability, gender, nationality, race or ethnicity, religion, sexual orientation, association with a person or group with one or more of those characteristics. And a hate crime can exist even if the person who commits the crime turns out to be wrong. What really matters is their motive. So if someone is assaulted because the person believed that they were gay, and then it turns out that the victim in that crime wasn't gay, it doesn't change the fact that a hate crime occurred and that was the motive and the cause of that act.
I think a classic example of that is the murder of Balbir Singh Sodhi, who was a Sikh gentleman who was one of the first people killed after 9/11 by a group that thought he was Muslim. He's Sikh, and so that's a hate crime. Even though he wasn't Muslim, he was killed because of his race, which would get the in California. It did in Arizona. It get the hate crime enhancement.
If convicted of a felony, then 3 years are added if a hate crime enhancement is proven. That's traditional for like a crime like robbery or assault. If the crime is murder, it can change the penalty to life in prison or the death penalty. Currently in California, we are not putting people to death by order of the governor, but that isn't a law that has been passed or voted on. So that can change depending on governors that come in. So the death penalty is something that can still be given to a person at trial.
That's not saying it's an automatic death penalty. It's saying that that the judge has leeway in sentencing to say if there is a hate crime enhancement, much like some of the other enhancements we've talked about in other cases, then that is still on the table.
Right. As is life in prison without the possibility of parole,
right.
Which we've talked about a few times, cases where premeditation changes the game a little bit.
Extreme violence against the young.
Yeah, or rape, or in the commission of another felony.
Right.
But this is a really, really difficult thing to prove. Some defenses to the hate crime charges that we might see during this trial. The first is that they didn't commit the underlying crime itself, that they are innocent of first-degree murder. The next one is that they weren't guided by hate, and the prosecutor has to prove that in that moment that bias was the reason, their racism was the reason that they chose to act. So they will try and prove that that's, not what was going through their mind at the time. There was some other reason they did what they did. And the third one is that their hate that the prosecutor will enter into evidence, their background, stuff they've written on social media, maybe even stuff witnesses said, perhaps texts, who knows what she has, but that all of that is just people using their First Amendment right. It doesn't have anything to do with this crime. They're allowed to be hateful, to say hateful things. It didn't inform their decision making here.
Which, given the fact that this crime is on videotape, the first part of what you mentioned is we're innocent of this crime. That's a lot harder to prove.
Right. Well, there are different kinds of murder. We've talked about this
First
before.
degree or
They are
second
being
degree,
charged.
right.
It's alleged that this is a first-degree murder.
Right.
So they may try to, we've seen that in other cases where they've tried to say that it was, maybe they'll argue there was a fight or there was some other incident leading to this, and maybe it was something more like manslaughter. I'm not really sure, but...
Well, with this whole timeline of the murder, them getting arrested the next day, and then the DA saying we're gonna throw on these enhancements of hate crimes, I feel like there's probably a lot more evidence that they're not telling us that they know about.
Right, and I tend to agree with that. I think what they have is probably social media. It seems like in a lot of these cases, that's the first best place to go to kind of collect this type of evidence is that people's social media feeds.
Like, like Big Brother, there was cameras, there's probably witnesses, there's just
Right.
a lot besides just social media that probably just happened that night. Jessica, you talked about that it was by a Shell station, so it was probably a, very busy area and everything like that. So I really hope they have a lot of evidence.
Yeah, I really hope so. I know hate crime charges have been something the public at large has wanted in a lot of cases, and it's been just so hard to prove. In some cases where it seems so obvious that that's what's happening here. But I know, like, the case I think of off the top of my head at Ahmaud Arbery, where they were found guilty using their text messages to each other and their other social media of hate crime charges federally. So hopefully, like what you're saying, Sean, is she says she wouldn't have brought charges if she couldn't prove it.
Right.
So,
but in the Ahmaud Arbery case, and again, I know this is one that we've talked a lot about off the air too, because of and we've mentioned him before, another amazing true crime podcast, but it's the Atlantic Journal-Constitution's podcast Breakdown, did an amazing, almost live coverage of the trial. But listening to those journalists who were in the courtroom, seeing the evidence and things like, the Confederate flag on the license plate and the text messages and the actual words that were spoken, and everyone still having a question of, of people putting those arguments forward that it wasn't really a hate crime. So, it's always, for those of us outside of it, it seems like obviously a hate crime, but it still is always kind of a question mark whether that will be able to be proved in a court of law.
and I think what's interesting here in this case, because there hasn't been a ton of media coverage or information that's leaked out about it, that what I got from the reading of the articles and watching the press conferences, that the motive in this case isn't anything else but hate, that this was a crime committed specifically for that purpose. There wasn't anything else, going on necessarily that someone could point to.
Right. I think, and you said the Tracy police chief at the press conference who says there is no other reason for this crime other than it's a hate crime. And I think that was really telling, because in a lot of the other cases that we've talked about where there are those enhancements, I don't feel like the language was quite as strong, even in some of those cases that we know are hate crimes.
It's weird that this case hasn't gotten very much attention.
Well, and I think too, another reason why we wanted to cover it was because it is unfolding in front of us here in California, especially in the Central Valley, and so we wanted to follow it as it progresses and to get the word out as much as possible. But I think that will change as in the weeks to come, as I think it will as more details, again, like you said, Sean, we don't know everything yet. A lot of the DA and the police are playing everything kind of close to the chest so far. I think this story will get bigger as it goes especially after the preliminary hearing.
And maybe because it's been quote unquote solved, they have 2 suspects in custody, that there isn't a lot of attention being paid to it. I mean, there are the initial articles, but it just feels like something that should be more talked about because it's such a terrible crime. And I know, living in the Central Valley, we've lived here most of our lives, an uptick, I think, in racially motivated actions and people displaying that kind of behavior more openly. And so, I mean, Tracy's not that far from where we are. It's a place we've, like, with the 3 of us, have spent a lot of time in or driven through, and it's just sickening that happened, that this happened here. But obviously, it's a reality lots of people live. And one of the things we definitely want to do before this episode's over is to tell you a little bit about the victim in this case, because one of the things that may happen during a trial, unfortunately, is that the victim will get pulled through the mud. We've seen that in a few of the trials we've covered.
Right.
So at the press conference announcing charges was his father, Maurice Peoples, and his aunt, Bernice Bass. They both spoke, and his father held a large poster board with pictures of his son, Justin Peoples, throughout various times in his life, including as he graduated, in his Navy whites, and as a child. Justin Peoples was 30 years old when he died on March 15th. He had attended and graduated from Edison High School in Stockton, California. He went to San Joaquin Delta College in Stockton and joined the Navy in 2010. During school, he played football and basketball and helped others with their algebra homework. He was a father of an 11-year-old and a 2-year-old. According to his father, Maurice Peoples, he was a youth pastor at a local church and worked 2 jobs. He delivered vehicle parts and packages and was saving to buy a home. His father also said he, quote, had a beautiful smile and the heart of a lion. Justin Peoples was meant to meet his father on Wednesday, March 16th for lunch. The last text his father sent to him was, quote, I'll see you tomorrow, son. I love you.
Well, I think all of us have seen that image played over and over again. It never fails to strike a chord or really make you think. But his father's pleas for justice for Justin were really hard to watch because it is close to home, for all of us. And then his aunt, hearing his aunt speak that the next time it could be her son or someone else's son or our son, it does really make you, anytime something like this happens, it makes you stop and think, but more so too when it's closer to home.
And we will continue to cover this case as much as we can because we also agree that Justin should and deserves justice. And we'll give you more information as we learn it as well.
Thank you for listening to this episode of California True Crime on the Darkcast Network. For a full list of sources, as well as more information on the case, head over to our webpage at californiatruecrime.com, where you can support the show by joining our Patreon, which has the option of ad-free episodes. Our web store is up and running with some new California True Crime merchandise, such as t-shirts, mugs, and special episode exclusive stickers. If you'd like to contact us, you can find us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Cali True Crime. Make sure that you subscribe to our show to get our latest episodes. Leave us a 5-star review or tell a friend to get the word out about California True Crime. We'd like to thank our quality control engineer, Melanie Duncan. This was recorded at Snail Ranch Studios and The Hangar. This has been a production of JCS Inc.